What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Player One vs. World for a very special interview. I'm Adnan, obviously, you know me very well from this channel, but here I have a very special guest. Is none other than Alyx Jones, who is the founder of Silverscript Games and is going to talk about her very special game which she's making, and obviously Life is Strange, because this channel is heavily Life is Strange related and we can't have content on this channel about Life is Strange. But Alyx, thank you for coming on. How are you?
I'm good. I did spot that when I was looking you up, and I was like, "Oh, they've interviewed someone from Life is Strange. This is going to be good."
Well, I felt that when I saw your game as well. As soon as Silverscript followed Player One vs. World on Twitter, I went on to the page and I was like, "Ooh." I was like, have I missed something here? This looks very interesting, very familiar as well in terms of the art direction. But as I said, we'll talk about that afterwards. But no,
Yes.
really great to have you here. And it's great that you live in the UK as well, because usually I'm up to like 1 o'clock waiting for someone to come on because of time zones. And it's nice to talk to a fellow Brit as well. So it's nice, nice to have that in the conversation. But before we start as well, I always ask anyone, if you are new here, do please consider dropping us a subscribe, turn on notifications, like the video and share with your friends. Helps keep up to date with the channel. It helps you promote this game, which we'll be talking about very, very soon. And also you can follow all the other content that we do on this channel. That out of the way, Alyx, you have a fascinating story, and I know this is a very cliche way of starting it, but I want you to tell us your story so far, because I think for people who don't know who you are, will definitely want to know who you are after this.
Mm-hmm. In terms of like how I started in games, or how this particular game started?
Oh boy, I will let you tell the story, because as I said, it's a very, very interesting story.
So this particular game is called The Quiet Things, and it's autobiographical. So it kind of starts when I'm 8 years old, and my mum sadly passes away from cancer. And so that's kind of where things started going wrong in my life, or becoming, I don't know, like it got very chaotic. And I didn't start thinking about making the game until I was at university, which is a long way in the future. But the game kind of covers my life from about 8 to 16, 17 years old. So it's quite a like reasonable chunk, but it works within like snapshots of memories. So it's kind of maybe like 3 or 4 kind of bits within each age range, and then kind of follows the story on throughout teenage years. But I mean, a lot happens in it, and I feel like it comes with a heavy content warning as well, of like mental health issues, abuse, self-harm, suicide, like quite a lot of like really heavy subjects. So I'm not going to like throw the whole story at you in case like you can talk about as much as you want to, but I think people should be aware of what it's going to cover.
Yeah, absolutely. As you said there, the mental health stuff is very important to this game, and it's essentially your story that you're telling here. And obviously, you know, I'm very sorry about your mum's loss as well. I can only, you know, I know myself losing a parent, how hard it is, and how difficult it must have been for you as well. But like, as I said, you know, yourself, you have an incredible track record in the video game industry. You've worked on some great games as well. You know, I look at Final Fantasy VII Remake, Borderlands 3, Elden Ring. Like, that's an incredible resume just at this point as well. But no, absolutely, you deserve it as well, because it's incredible for where your story has taken you, and then to kind of get to where you're at now, and then to put this project forward, you have to do it with Silverscript Games, which is the studio you founded for it. I wanted to know what the inspiration behind the name for the studio was.
So when I was a teenager, I was in a lot of bands, as one does, and I've gone through a lot of names in that time. But one of them was Silverscript, and I think I was like 14 or 15 maybe, and you know, they kind of last a few months maybe, and then you kind of like break up over some argument, and then you're like, not taking things seriously enough, I'm going to start another band with whoever else will go on my solo career. But I quite liked it then, and I like it now, because it kind of alludes to the kind of writing and narrative being the important part of it. So, and I think I'm quite an emo kid. Like, I like black and silver, and I was like, it's not gold, it's silver is the colour. So that's how that came about. Yeah.
I absolutely adore the mindset that you have, because I have my own gamer tags and PSN names, and they are like 10 plus years old. And when someone asks me now as well, when I work them, they're like, "What's your username?" And I'm like, I don't know if I say this now, because like it's got X and X at the beginning, X at the end, and it's like you can tell my emo phase was very much there. But no, I really like the fact that you kept that for the identity and didn't really get away from it. So, and part of your childhood there. But no, it's really interesting to hear about your story so far, and I think obviously, you know, congratulations on the launch of Kickstarter for this project. It was you know, that's a big setup for you guys. I've I've been in the industry for like, better part of 9+ years. When I was working as a journalist, I remember Kickstarter kind of coming up and how big it was for people to kind of launch games on them. But I wanted to ask you, there's still plenty of time left on that campaign, and there'll be links for people who are watching this. You can go and back the project. Obviously, you should go and back the project as well. But I wanted to know, how you came to the decision to use Kickstarter.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of different funding options when you're an indie game developer, and we were really super lucky to get the UK Games Fund in January. So we had a small amount of money to make a vertical slice, which for people that don't know is kind of like a small cross section of game play, which we use to make our demo that we put forward for the Kickstarter. And it's tricky because the story that I'm telling is my personal story, and so I'm in two minds about whether or not to go with a publisher, because I'm quite keen to self-publish it. So I thought crowdfunding was the next best option to kind of try and keep as much of it within ourselves and not just be like feeding corporate pockets, as it were. But yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of controversy around it, with people feeling like sometimes they've backed stuff and not got what they paid for, but we're obviously very committed to doing it. We've already started it, and it's just a matter of how long it takes, but having the money to like give a bit of breathing room to apply for different grants and fundings and look at options is kind of the aim.
Absolutely, and you mentioned it there because like I've seen the reservations with Kickstarter, because there's been projects in the past which have failed, have like not lived up to potential, and then I kind of like spent enough time reading the entire Kickstarter campaign for this, and it had like all the factors about risk and where the money's going for the budget. You can kind of, there's like pure transparency there from my telling. But I wanted to know, like, hypothetically speaking, if the project doesn't hit the Kickstarter goal, are there kind of contingencies you have in place to kind of keep this project going and keep moving forward without it?
Yeah, I think if the Kickstarter fails, then we're going to have to look at publishing. But there's quite a lot of kind of funds that are halfway between grants and publishing. There's like the Wings Fund, which is for female-led games companies, which I'll go for. And there's the publisher like Kowloon Knights, which seem quite nice compared to some other people. But I haven't really gone down that route, and I'm going to have a go at the Epic Mega Grant, which is for Unreal developers as well. But that's all ifs and buts and coconuts. So it's really a case of like trying all these different things and seeing what works and what doesn't. But it's my first time doing it from this perspective, so it's just seeing what happens and what sticks.
Oh no, I do not. You have an incredible feat. That's like, it's absolutely daunting. Sorry, to kind of get to where you're at right now to do this project, and then you're talking about the publisher, because I can see that there's this sense that you really want this project to be yours. Essentially, I know that. From my own experience, and we'll talk about Life is Strange in a minute, where it's like, they tried to pitch that game, and then there was kind of things with publishers who were basically like, we don't want two female leads in the main characters. But I think that I kind of see this hesitation with you, that you really want it to be independent, that you want to fund it yourself, create yourself. Is that because you want the message to stay pure instead of having, difficulties working around that?
I think it depends how much publishers want to take away from your IP, as it were, because for me, this game specifically is one story, and it's not like a franchise. And because it's a real story, you're not going to kind of keep creating stuff from that. But I'd also like to be able to make enough money to continue as a studio, and then we could tell other people's stories, not just mine. But that's all way in the future kind of dreams. But that, like having the money to be able to do that rather than just paying back to the publishers and paying them a big percentage of profits would mean that I could keep putting it back into development and paying all the people who work on our game.
Of course. That at least you have the priorities right of how you're dealing with it. And as I said, we've seen a really good start with the Kickstarter campaign, so hopefully in the next 2 weeks or so that it keeps continuing to see success. And obviously one of the things I saw, which was, I was reading it again, like I spent a lot of time on that, some of the inspiration of the games, Gone Home, What Remains of Edith Finch, that Dragon Cancer, and of course Life is Strange. And as I said, Life is Strange in particular has been really important in my life, and a long time it's had an impact on me. But I wanted to know, what was it about the title and the series that inspired you the most as well, for a game like The Quiet Things?
Yeah, I mean, Life is Strange has a massive impact generally because it was, I don't know, it just it's regarded as a good game for those kind of things. And there was moments in the game, for example, that do deal with like suicide and drug use and all that kind of thing throughout all the different Life is Stranges. But the original one, I think it has that, like, I didn't go to school in America, but there's a sort of nostalgia, even though that's not quite the word, of that kind of high school era of things. But it also, like, even though it's a fantastical concept of being able to rewind time, it manages to look into everybody's lives as a human and going through that time in your life when you're a teenager. I wouldn't go back to it for anything, but everything feels like 10 times more emotional when you're that age, I think. And so, like, going through that and all the hormones and everything, and looking at it and all the different issues that it does raise awareness about, that's why it was important to me. But the art style was just beautiful, and I think everyone on our team was like, Life is Strange, the kind of slightly painterly, like, semi-realism is what we really wanted to go for without ripping them off, of course.
Of course, you want to keep your own identity, but no, I can see why there's a heavy inspiration from Life is Strange in particular, and I can very much relate when you said that you weren't going to an American school yet. You know, you feel like you've always been there, because I feel like myself. You know, it's weird because, like, I always say to people, like, when they ask me, I'm like, I went to a high school, and they're like, why do you say high school? But I'm like, our school was called a high school. It was never called a secondary school. A bit strange, but I can kind of see that I felt the same way more so. So I know where you're coming from with that. But you know, with Life is Strange, a lot of great characters. I love a lot of them. But was there one particular Life is Strange character that you gravitated for a certain reason, and why, that you really connected with?
Always Chloe. Like, how can you have another girl that, like, dyes her hair and loves tattoos and go to gigs and stuff? It's an easy comparison, I think, in that sense.
Personal experiences as well. Do you think like there was a kind of a connection with, like, how she loses her father in tragic circumstances, that you felt maybe it connected with yourself? I feel like those kind of things happen with Life is Strange with the characters. Each character has its own adversity, and then people connect with them on that kind of basis.
Yeah, I mean, because they have a bit of a situation, maybe in Before the Storm it was, where there's a stepdad that comes onto the scene, and then he's a bit, like, heavy-handed, and there is a scene, depending on what you say, perhaps, that he'll, like, hit her and stuff. So that kind of, well, it has obvious comparisons to my life and going through abuse with an abusive father. So that's easy to relate to, sadly.
Yeah, as I said, it's hard, and I feel really bad for you as well for that, because it's not what you want to deal with growing up, and it can have really it can cause a lot of hard times for people. But as you said, your story, I imagine, will probably resonate with a lot of people, because it's not just something that one person experienced; many people experience it. But with Life is Strange, one more thing as well. Any particular scenes from the series, the titles that you've that have been really poignant for you, that have stood out? Obviously, you spoke there about the Dave Madsen, Chloe Price slap kind of scene, but is there anything that really, like, one of those scenes that really stood out for you? Because I know people usually kind of go to the scenes with, like, Kate on the rooftop when she's about to jump off of Max. Is there anything that, like, one of the scenes that really stood out for you?
That rooftop one was hard because they then stopped you rewinding it to be able to go and save her, and so you kind of play the whole game going, oh, you know, any decision I make is sort of doesn't matter as much because I can go and change it, or that's part of the game mechanic, but then you can't, and you're like, oh my god, that's happened. But I think also in True Colours, the most recent one, after her brother dies, she plays, like, the Radiohead song on guitar, and that was really nice as well. Like, I kind of remember that. And I quite like all the bits in Life is Strange where they have points where you can kind of sit and have a bit of a montage moment, you know, when it just kind of cycles through a couple of scenes. Like, I like those pauses in gameplay.
Oh, absolutely. And so let's reverse this as well a little bit, no pun intended, for Life is Strange, but, like, let's move to Silver Script Games, because I mentioned it early on, it's a very small team. Not many will people think, obviously, indie developers are smaller. Who makes up this team, and what roles do they do?
Yeah, so there's me, and I do everything. If you know what I mean, kind of like a bit of marketing, a bit of, like, actual development. Like, I've made the demo in Unreal Blueprints, and I'm not, like, a trained programmer, but it's kind of okay. It works, so that's fine. So we don't have, like, a proper programmer yet. We have 3 artists called Tabby, Con, and Georgia, and they were kind of the first people that I brought on, and I think I found them through Twitter. But it was important to me that they understood what the game was about and that it resonated with them in a sense, rather than necessarily being, like, whatever AAA grade artist. And I think they're all graduates. Georgia's a master's graduate as well, but they're all very, very talented. So it doesn't really matter that that wasn't a consideration because they're all amazing. I guess it's just managing pipelines and workflows and stuff for people who haven't worked in a studio before. But yeah, they basically do all the 3D modelling, and Georgia was kind of responsible for the Life is Strange aesthetic, getting like the painterly kind of effects that everyone could use and share and keep on the same page with 3 artists. And more recently we have Liam Parker, who does like the lighting, so he's a technical artist, so he just basically moans that everything's not set up the way it should be or optimized, which is great because it's not. And then we have Kirsty Gilmore, who's the voice director, and she also does all the casting, and she was a BAFTA Breakthrough as well the year before me, and so we kind of moved in circles around games since then, and I thought she was the perfect person to come and work on the game, and she's been really good, of course. And then Kev, who does sound design, so basically all the little footsteps and the rain that you might hear, and a drawer opens and you pick something up, like everything needs sound. So yeah, I think that's the whole team.
I believe so. I was looking through and I was like, yep, and the composer is Alyx, and this is Alyx, and I was like, even when I messaged you, I was like, and Alyx is talking to me on Twitter, and I was like, she's doing a lot here, and I was like, yeah, I've got indie developer, and you only have a small team with a certain amount of resources, but it seems like you have a really nice team, and it's I like the fact that you have the artists and you gave them a chance, because you know, it's very difficult to get into the video game industry. It's absolutely hard but to give someone a breakthrough, it's an amazing experience to have them on this. And with that as well, because you mentioned the art direction, because like as I said, when you followed Silverscript, followed Player One Vs One on Twitter, I opened up Silverscript's Twitter page. I was like, hang on a minute, I was like, I've seen that artwork, I know it, and I know the design. And then I spent time looking through the game as well, and seeing much Life is Strange vibes. I don't think obviously it's anywhere near, you know, it's you know, copying or anything. It's just obviously a big admiration for a game that you like, but you have these artists that are working on the game. And I wanted to know, like, you know, did Life is Strange have a resonance with them? And then also the importance that you gave to the artist to have a sense of identity and uniqueness whilst in channeling the inner Life is Strange design, because obviously I imagine that they have their own kind of ways of presenting things. But, you know, how did you balance that kind of sense of giving them an identity and giving them a direction with the quiet things?
Yeah, I think Georgia had a portfolio, and within it there was a scene that she'd done that was Life is Strange inspired anyway, and so that was a natural, easy choice. I think Connor is quite strong on the more realistic style of stuff. Like, he had some quite impressive like office spaces, but they were just lit and looked really nice. And Tabby had done lots of like props and little things like that, so I think everyone had kind of a strong point that we were able to draw from. But in terms of art direction, like, it's tricky because the environments are all based on real places in my life, but I don't want it to necessarily look exactly the same, and I don't have pictures of what my childhood bedroom looked like properly anyway. So it's kind of getting the kind of aesthetic. Like, I quite like the fairy lights vibes, like they're in quite a lot of the Don't Nod games and stuff like that, that kind of feels a bit cozy. But we also had to be careful with copyright for things like we couldn't put real bands in the game. So in the same way that Life is Strange kind of makes up logos for like Firewalk and stuff, we kind of took what would be an obvious reference to a band, which I hope isn't breaching copyright, but it's like, if you know the band, you know what that is. So you can kind of look for the Easter eggs in that sense for what everyone is. And so it's basically, they have freedom to work however they want, but we kind of have a big art bible of stuff and reference images that I've put things through, and then George just made like the kind of painterly effects that we can all use. Well, I can't use, but they use to create the models. So it's kind of a combination of being inspired by real things and picking out things that were kind of from the era, like from 90s to noughties kind of at time zones, but not breaching copyright, and making sure that they're not super real and that they kind of have that painterly aesthetic.
I love that you've done that as well. And like, one of my favorite stories I've ever had, just to kind of give you context, is a very famous comic between, I believe it's Superman and Muhammad Ali, and they're fighting it in a comic. And on the front cover, it's meant to have celebrities from like all different times who've like kind of come to see this super fight in a boxing match. And what they did was that the celebrities they couldn't get the actual copyrights for, they put mustaches on them. So just to hide the copyright, they were like, okay, this person gets a mustache, this person gets a mustache, just to hide that, but everyone else was like as normal. So I'm gonna assume you're fine with the copyright, because I know we
had a look at stuff, and Splatoon even has like games consoles that are blatantly what you would know, but they're just called something different and look very slightly differently. So we've checked.
But I imagine, just based off my age and yourself, I imagine you're a millennial, yes?
Yeah, I was born in 1993, so I'm on that weird like cusp, but yeah.
Yeah, so I'm a 1993 baby as well, and
Oh,
that's my
nice.
favorite part. Like, if I was making a game in your position, all I could think about is putting references in there, and even if I was going to get copyrighted, The Simpsons, bands and stuff, I feel like I'd have to put it in there. So I understand completely the position you're coming from. So it'll be nice to see those as well for people who play the
Yeah.
game as well to get those references. Um, And speaking of which, obviously, like, before I spoke to you, I read the interview that you did with the NME, which was really great. And I got a lot of things about the quiet things, learned a lot. And also the talk about you being part of the BAFTA Breakthrough program. And in that program as well, you were mentored by a lot of people. And I know you spoke highly of Tim Schafer, but one person that really caught my eye and there was the Life is Strange writer, Jean-Luc Cano.
Yeah,
Because I know of him quite well, because I've had enough time with Luke and Michelle Coe, who from Don't Nod have worked with him. They're working on with him on the new project that they're working on in Montreal. I get his picture quite wrong a lot of times. I keep like, they always have this picture where it's Luke, Michelle, and
I
Jean-Luc,
think I
and
know
I'm
the one you mean.
yeah, it's always me, and it's like I get like a message from Luke saying, that's not who you think it is. It's like it's Jean-Luc. I'm like, is it? I'm like, anyway, always get it wrong. But I wanted to know, you had the opportunity because obviously we just spoke about Life is Strange, great experience playing the game, but then you get to be mentored by a guy who worked on the series, played an instrumental part for that Don't Nod original game, and then has worked with them since then as well. But I wanted to know, what was it like meeting Jean-Luc? Being mentored by him, any valuable experiences you picked up from him and lessons? What was it like?
Yeah, he's incredibly lovely and was really willing to like carry on offering to like playtest the game and like keep on giving feedback about the narrative. I'm not a writer as such. It just happens to be my story, so it's easy to write the story because it's happened. But it's making it kind of workable for the players so that they can play it in an order, because obviously they're not going to relive 20 years of my life, and equally you have to choose what you're going to put in there and what not, like what's important. And I think some of the bits in the story, when we showcased it at GDLX, there's just, I think it's a line with the young Alice that's like, we used to give my mouse baths in the sink, and people were like, oh, it's quite nice because it's kind of disarming around all the other stuff that's going on. But like, it doesn't mean anything, it's not key to the story, but it just gives you like real snippets of what kind of things happen in someone's real life, like, because you're in someone's actual house and room, which is kind of weird when you think about it, but obviously it's virtual. But he was really helpful, and he said when they were working on Life is Strange, he did a lot of research of what it was like to be a teenage girl, because obviously he's not a teenage girl. Bless him. And I can't remember what the name of the series was, but it was maybe MTV or something like that used to do kind of, they'd go into schools and talk to people, but they realised that every person that they spoke to basically had something going on in their life, whatever, mental health, they'd lost a parent, or divorces happen quite a lot. And when you speak to everyone, you get that kind of story. And it's quite nice in Life is Strange how they've done that with all the characters. They all have something, and even the ones that you kind of set up to not like perhaps initially, then you realise that there's more under the hood. And I think that's true of everyone really in life, that you come across, you might not know what battles they're facing internally or going on with. And so that was kind of important in the game, and it made me also think about breaking it down for people, because he kind of recommended, like, Life is Strange often is in episodes, and so thinking, well, a player's not going to play a game for like 8 hours straight necessarily, have like breakdownable chunks of like an hour or two at a time to make sure that they have like a breathing room to drop in and out of the game. So yeah, that helped.
That's blowing my mind. No, it's so cool because I've had my experience with Luke Bagados, who worked on the first Life is Strange and 2, and they're now at Montreal, and same with Michelle Coe. I've had interactions on Twitter, so it's kind of nice to have had that opportunity to mingle with developers, but then for yourself to be mentored by someone who's so pivotal towards the first Life is Strange, give you really constructive feedback. It's quite great to hear that, and it's like, I like the fact that he told you about the chapter scenario, and then also him going to to finding out how to be a teenage girl, which is quite reflective, because obviously I feel like you have that advantage because we're telling your story, aren't we, here in this game? But it's like for him, he has to kind of go and live in a different world completely. So that's really good. But I'm sorry, like I might have completely zoned out a little bit, but have you kind of been talking to him during the process of building this game, getting any extra feedback, or have you been able to keep in contact with him since?
So I need to send him a build, but he's a Mac user, the same as I am. But unfortunately, Unreal does not want me to build for Macs, so I've only
Oh,
got a Windows playable thing. So I'm just like waiting to be able to do that, and then I will send it to him. But yeah,
yeah.
everyone I've had is very like approachable by email. I can like keep checking in with them if I want to. Like it's what you put into it, I guess. But I never want to take advantage of their time because everyone's really busy as well. So I'll just like collect up some questions and then do it like that rather than just
Oh,
like bombarding.
oh, absolutely. And I imagine the feedback is unbelievable when you get it as well, just for having it from well-known developers in the industry. Just for context as well, before we move on as well, what is the BAFTA Breakthrough for people who don't know? Because obviously I'm British, I know all about BAFTAs, but other people might be like, what's the BAFTA Breakthrough that we've been talking about?
Yeah, so the BAFTA Breakthrough scheme is basically a platform that recognises up and coming talent, and they have one in the UK. I think they have it in quite a few different countries now. They run it at different times, but you essentially, I feel like the cohort's like 10 to 20 people, maybe something like that. Like it's not massive, it's quite competitive to get into, but there once you're accepted into the program, you get full BAFTA membership for a year, which is pretty cool. So you get voting rights on games. You have access to the headquarters in Piccadilly. They do a lot of masterclasses and stuff, which is actually accessible to most people, whether or not you have a membership. You can go to those things. The actual BAFTA breakthroughs all get like a photo shoot day, which if you've never been on a photo shoot is a bit different. But you do get hair and makeup done and have interviews and get to meet some of the other breakthroughs, which is quite nice. And they have like celebration parties. And I think one of them I was at, and I was just like, oh, there's Baz Luhrmann just hanging out in the corridor. Like, this is weird. But yeah, they're really amazing. You get I think we had life coaching. They hook you up with industry mentors like we were talking about. I think it's a really valuable scheme compared to some other like awards and lists that you just kind of like that's that and move on. They kind of support you for a year until the next cohort comes in. So yeah, it's really, really good. Definitely.
No, that's really cool.
I think it closes on Thursday, so if you haven't applied and this is out in time, then you can apply for it quickly.
You're more you're more supportive of my editing skills than I am, but
Yeah.
if I do manage to get this out, if I do manage to get this out before Thursday, yes, it is still available if you do want to apply. So I would recommend that. But no, congratulations on being part of that.
Thank you.
Obviously, it's been a huge part of your career, and as I said before, your resume speaks in volumes about what projects you worked on, and then having the opportunity to work under people like Jean-Luc and then Tim Schafer. I know you think really high of Tim Schafer, so it's like those opportunities are like unbelievable for the moment. But as I said, the quiet thing, we'll move back onto that for a moment, because this is based on your real life. It's based on real life diary entries. But my main concern in myself was like, how is she managing her mental well-being whilst doing the project? Because for me, it seems like you're almost essentially digging up a lot of trauma on a regular basis to develop this title. Like, was that one of the most important steps to get onto this project to begin with, was that you had to make sure that you were dealing with things in the right kind of way to keep yourself essentially sane at that point?
Yeah, I mean, it didn't happen now. It happened a while ago, and I'm 30 now, so this is all kind of 10 to 15 years in the past. And I think those kind of things get dug up regularly in life, sometimes anyway. So there's like a couple of occasions during like court cases, because I have like a half brother and half sister, who ended up going to a refuge, and I was trying to like make sure that custody was kept of them and not given back to my dad. So I have like a big old social services folder that's just mine, is like a massive like volume, and so I've had to go through a lot of those kind of documents already. So I already had it, as well as like the diaries that I've kept. And I started making the prototype when I was at university, which is kind of around the time that I started talking about things for the first time, like more openly then. And so it was kind of when I started to be more open and think, oh, I can actually like talk about these things. I think there was like a bit of a trend at the time that was like Draw My Life, where you kind of did like doodles of things that you'd gone on and like told your story a little bit, and that was what I did when in my first year, and then loads of people responded to it, and that was kind of what made me realise it was okay to talk about it and carry on talking about it. So yeah, what was the question I was asking?
I was
I just got off on a tangent.
it was essentially like how you're managing your mental well-being whilst doing the project, because you're digging through all this stuff that you've said, and it's like, was it really important to kind of deal with that first, in the sense that you had structure in place to make sure you were protected whilst doing this?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I've kind of dealt with things as much as anyone does deal with things. I've been through quite a lot of therapy. Thank the NHS that we have access to that kind of thing, and various
Yeah.
charities that support you. So I've had like rape and sexual abuse counselling, which is probably the heaviest stuff that's hardest to deal with. And I'm not saying that I'm better, because you never really get over some of those things, but I feel like I'm a fairly functioning adult, and because they're quite historical events that I'm talking about, even though it's a lot, I've also kind of gone through experiencing it. I've then gone through like a couple of court cases relating to that, where you have to do interviews and constantly describe things in detail and all that kind of thing. Then gone through a lot of therapy to kind of get out the other side of it, because you can't really have counselling while you're going through it. Like, you can, but you can't process something while it's still happening to you. And so all the stuff as an adult is where I've actually kind of talked through it in a different way with a different perspective. And I think in a way, making the game and being able to talk about those things, even when I was back at university, is therapeutic in a way, because when you put something out there that is so vulnerable and people respond to it in a positive and supportive way, it keeps reinforcing that things weren't your fault. This didn't happen because you're a bad person. It happens to a lot of people, and people share their own experiences with that. And then, you know, all the time that you're told you're this one isolated case of a person, and then you realise that so many other people have gone through whatever version of events that are the same, you kind of wonder why we weren't talking about it all openly in the first place. So like, all of that in combination, I think the end result is quite positive. And it's not like, I'm not saying that it's not difficult, and I'm especially conscious doing like the voice recording sessions with actors, how it impacts them as well to reenact these moments. Because I'm all right, I'm in the control room with the director and I'm just checking off things on a script and making sure that the performances are okay, but they're having to inhabit that. So we're looking at using like a wellbeing coordinator for the upcoming sessions, because they're a bit more heavy than what we've done so far. So yeah, I'm just living my life.
Yeah, I think like that's what we have to do at this point. But it's good that thing that you had therapy, I think, is really helpful. It really changed my life as well when I had it. And you know, putting yourself in a better place is the main thing. I always try and encourage people to do it as well, because I think once you've done it, it kind of really helps you reflect on things. It doesn't give you, as you said, undisputed closure, but I think it just helps you with things. So in that as well, obviously, one of the things I noticed with the kind of project names and places will be changed for certain reasons as well. But with that as well, the main character for the story, Alice, why is she called Alice and not Alyx?
So I basically just changed everybody's name in the game to... I think it gives a little bit of distance when you're writing a script about it and when I'm talking to the team about it, because I'm not talking about it as like, I did this, I did that, this happened to me. I'm saying, this is what Alice's room looks like, or this is how Alice met this character. And so it's a bit easier to think of it as a story, or it just gives a degree of separation that allows people to work with it. Although I'm not saying like in the sessions, people do slip up sometimes because they know in their mind that it's about me, and I think maybe if I was going to change the name, I should have made it completely different rather than really close. But like, people sometimes would like mishear my name as Alice, so I thought that was like a fun thing to call the character. I don't know.
No, I like that touch, and you just kind of mentioned what I was going to ask you next, because obviously this is an autobiographical game, but I just wanted to know, were you ever curious I'm curious more, but were you considering at any point not to tell anyone that it was about you at this point? Like, you're going to make this game just tell the story and then not say it was you specifically that these all experiences were built on? Or was it always from the beginning just to tell people that this is my story? It's an autobiographical game, but did you have any consideration of just doing it as a story, and I'm not going to tell you it's actually about me?
I think maybe when I made the prototype, I wasn't as clear about the fact that it was about my life, but I think the more that people know that it's an autobiography, it kind of sparks a bit more interest. And I think it helps knowing that, for example, people's trauma can sometimes be exploited in media. Like the Dharma is a really massive example of that, but in loads of ways. And I don't know, but you know, there's lots of people who are making profit who are not the people who are telling their stories out of their stories. And like you say, they have to dig up stuff and relive it. And so I think it helps maybe knowing that it's my story. Like, I mean, I'm not profiting from it at all. Like, I don't get paid anything at the moment. But in theory, in the future, if we did, that that it's going to the right people who all worked on it and cared about it, it's not being made for the wrong reasons, I think. And I think it's sort of because that Dragon Cancer did it in that way, and it gives a slightly different impact knowing that it's real and knowing that like the people that you see talking about it are the people whose story it is. I think it has more impact and it's a bit more powerful in that way. So it was kind of worth calling it what it was. And I don't mind talking about the fact that it's my story because it is.
Yeah, that is true. You can't really hide away from that fact. And just to kind of give you context as well, like I have a podcast that I hold called StrangeCast with my host Adam, and one of the things he brought up was the kind of thing that he wanted to shout. And I just remember this was he said that he was listening to Jeanette McCurdy's book, I'm Glad My Mum Died. And it was kind of like the exposition that you get from it, something that I want to listen to at some point in an audiobook, because I think her story is quite fascinating just from the tidbits that Adam had told me. But she spoke about her experience with her mum, the kind of like really abusive relationship she had with her, and like deep down, even before I even listened to it or something, I think that's almost like a bit of a therapy for her in terms of that she's telling her story. She doesn't care necessarily if you listen to it, but it's more about her having the opportunity and the platform to finally tell people who she is, what happened to her, rather than the glitz and glams of the life that she might have had on iCarly, etc. But I wanted to know, is this your kind of moment in terms of the quiet things? Is it a form of therapy for you, essentially, that you can kind of just tell the story that you need to do? And then, because as I said, therapy can only take you so far, what you have with other people in sessions, but I feel like this is almost kind of a moment for you to kind of have your own therapy moment. And whether people choose or not to play it, that's a different story. It's just giving you an opportunity to tell the stories of 8-year-old Alyx's story in as much as humanly possible.
Yeah, I mean, when I first started talking about stuff just to my friends, they'd be like, oh, you should write a book about this, because a lot of stuff happened in like a really short amount of time, which are all kind of like adult experiences, so you grow up very fast. And like, yeah, naturally it is therapeutic in a way, but we also grew up, as you know, in a generation of people that kind of started to put their lives on the internet quite a lot with MySpace and Bebo and Facebook, and it became more normalised as a teenager just to kind of throw out whatever was going on. I mean, obviously that's embarrassing to look back on because it would just be like, had a chip or something, but it was kind of more normalised to share things in that way. And equally, when you're being abused and perhaps like groomed and sexually abused as well, it's very enforced not to tell anyone about what's going on, and that either people wouldn't believe you, or this is your fault, or like you're the bad person. And so you're kind of stuck in this belief that you shouldn't talk about it, and that if you did, people would either hate you or believe that it was your fault or that you're the bad person. So there's no reason why you would tell anyone about it. So being able to take back that control and say, actually, I do have a voice, I can talk about those things, is quite a powerful step in kind of, it's like maybe the final way of breaking free from everything that happened, because that's the ultimate control that they had over you, was that they took away your voice. And so me and everyone else who shares their stories are probably just taking back that control for ourselves.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think like I just kind of wanted to dig in more into this in the sense like, just kind of your context make you feel a bit old. I realize that like millennials like 25 to 44 now in terms of the age range.
I don't even know what like
yeah, it's like for me, like and yourself, like you were saying, like the social sharing experience that you had as a millennial growing up, you only shared certain things, and it's like I always felt like the mental health services that I wanted when I was younger didn't exist, and I was hoping that for future generations they would be there, because we seem to be getting more gradually to that position where people talk about things. But we live in the UK, and I'm glad that you had your own opportunity with therapy through the NHS, but it takes people years to get on the list for those, and same with the years on the list on ADHD treatment and autism and stuff like that. And I feel like one of the things I'm kind of like getting a little bit reserved with is like the help that people have, because like you've seen suicide rates go up in the UK. You've seen people, I think I read somewhere on the BBC yesterday about antidepressants, people being on them for 5 years or something, like a long period of time than this should be necessarily. But I was wondering, like, when you look at all that and you see like this kind of, everything that's happening in the climate, do you think like games like yours are almost going to be like therapy for a lot of people in terms of that they can't necessarily live your experience because each person's own trauma or anything else will be different? But do you think like video games have played such an important role in helping people a lot more because you can talk about these things, you can tackle themes that just wouldn't have been spoken about 15-20 years ago? And do you think that they're kind of like helping people guide life through when they can't necessarily reach these services?
Yeah, I think there's kind of like I don't know, it might just be my life, but when I was younger and I didn't really understand what abuse was, I'd kind of engaged with media more heavily that perhaps dealt with those kind of things. Like I read lots of Kathy Glass books, they're basically children who've been in care or abused or whatever. But I didn't know that I was necessarily going, I'm relating to this. Like I just keep like looking for things that I'm trying to understand, I guess, when you're young and you don't really know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the same with like TV shows. Like there's a show called My Mad Fat Diary, which is really cool, but deals with self-harm as well. And it was the first time that I'd ever seen self-harm like spoken about or presented in any show that wasn't just like a news report being like emos are killing themselves, it's a subculture, Satanism kind of a thing. That was not like sensationalist. It was a very real thing of like, this girl's not even necessarily like an emo stereotype, it's just something that people do to cope. And that's still kind of like not an okay thing to talk about. Like if you went up to someone and said that, it would be like, oh god, I don't know what to do with that information.
Yeah.
So in those kind of ways, I think it's helpful for people to have those kind of things presented in a way that they can choose how much or how little they can want to engage with it. But it's not going to replace therapy, because it's a bespoke thing that you talk about with your own therapist. And I think like it's a bit of a bleak landscape, not just in the UK but everywhere in getting access to therapy, and especially given how over COVID how much people perhaps went downhill because they were just not seeing their friends and couldn't leave the house, and naturally it has an impact on your mental health, that it's really hard to get the help you need, especially with the NHS. Like we're very thankful that we have it at all, but there is big long waiting lists. And even when I was a teenager, you pretty much had to try to kill yourself or get sectioned to be able to get long-term support. Otherwise, even now you just get like 6 sessions and then they're like, off you go. And it's like, we're not better in 6 sessions, we've barely scratched the surface. And even offering things like CBT is great for like a really short-term relief to be able to cope with things on a really small scale, but it's not going to unpack 10 years of trauma. And I don't think that, especially for young people, there's enough help to stop that spiraling into adulthood. So, I mean, games are great, and especially games that you can use in escapism and a coping methods. Like, I think there was a study done to do with like playing Tetris right after a traumatic event happened, and it would make the PTSD a bit less. But yeah, like we can't bandage up a broken mental health system with games, but it certainly can raise awareness about the issues that we need to be talking about, I think.
No, absolutely. I fully agree with you, because like even the 6 sessions they offer you isn't enough. Like when I did private therapy for years because I had to do it. And one of them ones when I first met my psychiatrist, just to kind of give context to people, like, you know, she said to me, we're going to build a timeline of your life. I'm like, oh, okay, this is going to be fun. It'll take me like 1 session. It took 4 sessions to do. And this was like from, you know, the age of like 1 up to 25, 6, however old I was there. So it's like, it's not just as simple of like, oh, 6 sessions, we can deal with what you need to and we'll move you on. It's not as easy as that. So I completely understand what you mean with like, you know, people need more time and the services need to be a lot better as well. So yeah, there's a lot more needs to be done. Okay, so let's move back to the quiet things here, because Emily Burnett is the titular character, who is Alyx, who you've casted for this. I know that Kirsty will, as you said, will do the voice casting, and then also the direction. You're there for some of the sessions that you'll be doing, but obviously for you, I imagine that this casting was obviously very significant because she's playing you. I wanted to know what made Emily feel like she was the perfect Alyx and somebody who could really tell your story.
Yeah, we got a lot of auditions, and so we do a thing where we get self-tapes back, so we give maybe like 6 lines from the script that covers a range of different emotional and different, kind of get like the breadth of dynamic that a voice actor would need to cover. And so Kirsty will pick out maybe her top 10, and I basically will listen through everything and then we'll talk about what options were at best. But I think Emily just stood out because she sounded right, and I know that's not very like helpful technical term, but she just had like a good dynamic, and she sounds enough like a teenager, but we definitely didn't want to put a real teenager in the role because there's a lot to deal with and we don't want to deal with minors getting traumatized by it. So we were like, we're definitely going to use an adult for this. And yeah, I think Emily was an easy choice in that sense, and she's been very, very good in sessions. I think it's very helpful that she has experience with The Dumping Ground, which is like a Tracy Beaker spin-off series. So that deals with kids that live in a care home as well. And so where she might have already had kind of experience talking about more difficult things, I think her character in the series has like a mum who's in prison or something like that. And so like there's like difficult subjects that are broached in that. So that was an additional bonus, but it wasn't the reason. I think she just had like not too posh, not too common kind of a thing. Like I had some privilege growing up in terms of financial stuff up to a point, and then obviously after my mum passed away, we didn't have that, and so I think it was important that it was coming from like a middle ground of everything. Yeah, she's very sensitive to the role, and just she's a natural at it though as well, so it's easy going.
So what are the other characters that will be in the game? Is it like obviously a large cast, or is it a smaller cast? Like, who are the main characters that people should keep an eye out for in the story?
Yeah.
Or am I ruining the game by telling people?
I'm trying to think, because we've done like our first round of casting and recording, and we've started the second round now. So we've had one recording session this month, and we kind of do like 1 or 2 a month, for like a 3-month chunk. But it's basically everybody that I potentially grew up with, and then it also transitions into school, and so we've got some school friends and teachers in there, which are kind of, when you're living in quite a chaotic home environment, can be quite key in how you think about yourself or how you potentially get yourself out of that situation. Lisa is the therapist, and so a lot of the scenes when we get into the actual real game, not the demo, are kind of cut between some therapy sessions of how I would have spoken about it not being listened to by people at home. So, and also there's a thing of you're quite shut down when you're younger, so it's kind of a therapist's job to make you think about things and why things are happening or whatever's going on. You don't necessarily have an adult perspective on things, so it's always written to be kind of like age appropriate as how I was thinking and feeling at the time. There's of course my dad. I don't know whether or not I'm going to cast my brothers, because they obviously would have to start at 4 and 6, and getting very, very young child actors to deal with any of those kind of topics is probably not really appropriate. So they may not necessarily be voiced in the game. And it continues through my life when I'm a teenager, and there's like a couple of different families that I lived with in that time. So those characters are all still to come. But yeah, we have live casting happening now.
Oh, very nice, very nice. So it's really cool to have all those different people, like, you know, you can tell their stories that are part of your story as well, and then to be able to cast for them. But, you know, specifically with Emily, because she's playing Alyx, did you have time to spend time with her outside of the booth, just to have a bit of experience of like meeting her, kind of sitting down, telling your story? Because I imagine it, like, if I was her in her position, to kind of get your story is the crux of my performance. So I'd want to know everything about you. Did you have time to kind of have that opportunity to sit together before you did a recording session?
We didn't, but she does live quite far away, so it wasn't necessarily like doable, but we were quite careful to give like a thorough brief in the casting, and so they knew everything that the character was going to have to deal with, and of course give like a variety of lines. And we were also mindful to send the script ahead of sessions, so that they always had time to read through it and know what was coming up, so that they weren't shocked by something. I mean, we haven't done anything really bad yet, it's just kind of like still at the younger age, but yeah, it'll get worse.
Yeah, it's the yet part, you know. It's like,
yeah,
we've still got a lot of stuff to do at this point. So with the Kickstarter, this game's going to be specifically coming to PC platforms first, with Steam, etc. And then obviously I imagine if the Kickstarter goes ahead, everything gets more successful, you'll look for a future release onto different platforms. I imagine, is that something that you want to do in terms of goals of getting it onto consoles? Because like, I look at this game, it feels like something I would love to play on Nintendo Switch, because you mentioned like Gone Home, you mentioned Life is Strange, a lot of these games are now getting onto Switch. I feel like this game would be perfect for that. Is it the ambition to get it onto consoles after PC release, you know, if everything goes the way it does?
Yeah, so Xbox is the one we've started the application with. They're quite indie friendly, and they give you dev kits and stuff if you're an indie developer, so I'm hopefully that will go well. PlayStation is a little bit harder, because you have to have 2 years worth of accounts as a company, which we don't have yet. So the thing is that in 2 years will maybe be able to apply for that. And Nintendo Switch, I don't actually know, because I always associated it with kind of Pokemon and Zelda and stuff like that, and it didn't really necessarily occur to me that much that people would want it on that platform. But now you've said that, I'll look into it. You heard it here first.
No, absolutely. Well, it surprises me about the Xbox thing, because I make jokes about Xbox to my friend Adam. He's an Xbox player, and I always say like he must be the only Xbox player I ever know. But it's like it surprises me that the indie friendliness is more on the Xbox side at this point, because PlayStation for years had this reputation of being a really indie friendly developer, but yeah, you're working for the Xbox at this point as a kind of first starting point, which is interesting to hear. Nonetheless, but hopefully, yeah, and hopefully it does come to Switch as well, because my friend Adam will definitely pick it up after watching this interview.
Okay.
He'll be definitely keen on that. So, as I said, like, you know, you got your hands in pretty much every single pocket of this game, and one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was obviously music. My friend Adam would be furious because he's a composer if I didn't talk about this. So, like, we have to talk about it. So, with this as well, this project, I know that you have played guitar growing up, that it was a really good form of you, almost like a modern day Max that we can see it as, but like, you know, music really brings people together. It really helps with this, and I really enjoyed the preview that you had for the track in the game that was on Kickstarter, which was I Only Come to School to See If Anyone Notices When I Leave. So I wanted to you talk to me about the behind the scenes of making that track, because you know, I saw the Kickstarter, you said that Daughter was a big source of inspiration. I love Daughter. I love what they did on Before the Storm. It's very harrowing, their music. But I wanted to know, like, you know, when you make a track like this for this game, how long did it take you to craft a track like this? And then what are the kind of key elements you wanted to highlight in the music to kind of accompany the stories being told? Because as we said with this project, it's quote unquote a walking simulator. So your music's going to be quintessential to the experience.
Yeah, that song was written quite a while ago to go with the prototype that I made. I didn't really know that shoegaze as a term, what it really meant for quite a while, and I think that's something that I like quite a lot in artists, but I don't know, I'd call it like lots of reverbs and atmospheric kind of things, but still with like a sort of rock aesthetic in a sense. Yeah, I played guitar growing up. It was something that I loved to just zone into and just practice, and nothing else really mattered for a bit. But I studied creative music technology at university, and then I studied a master's in music composition, so it was very much ingrained in everything that I did, and it wasn't until then that I realised I could work in games. So then I was like, oh, I must work in games. But the track's like inspired by a lot of different things, but it kind of like the Life is Strange vibe is quite heavy. Like when I play the game and I listen to the soundtrack, even though all of that music was licensed rather than written specifically for the games, it just fits together well. I think some combination of like acoustic guitar and like electric, but not like really, really heavy, works quite well. And there's games like, I don't know if you know Flower.
I know of it, haven't played it, but know of it.
Yeah, it has a really, really beautiful, just like acoustic guitar, relaxing kind of, you're just a petal gathering other petals. You know, it's very nice. But even just the menu music for that, I could just leave on loop forever, and that's the kind of thing that I want to kind of get towards a little bit with some of the songs. But there's also in the game we're looking at licensing some songs, probably like Naughty's kind of rock stuff to cover, because they were such a huge part of growing up, and also when you didn't have the words to necessarily like express how I was feeling, a lots of artists and rock bands did, and that is quite poignant in some of the things that are happening in my life as well, that you relate to these songs without necessarily realising the full extent as to why. So hopefully we can license some cool stuff as well.
Hopefully, and it's really funny you mentioned the thing about Life is Strange soundtrack, because I love the soundtrack. But I always said that one of the criticisms I wrote in one of my reviews I did for it, where I said that, you know, I wish they would have used the composing music a lot more, because Jonathan Morelli did the composition for it. Yeah, you know, I love Obstacles and Sid Matters, but like I was like, I kind of didn't want them necessarily to use it every other section. I was like, the original composition music you've done is beautiful. It's like, I wish there was a bit more of that. So it's kind of nice to see that there's you have the appreciation for that, but then, you know, you can kind of compose your own music here as well, and you can bring in licensed tracks. So to kind of round this off as well, obviously, you know, I know this is a budget game, you only have so much resources, but did you know that you'd be the composer from the offset? Like, you had no option, you didn't really want to bring in another composer. Was it the plan for you to compose the music originally, or did you consider bringing an external composer to do it?
Yeah, I mean, music's always been my thing. Before I'd made games, I've always written music to cope. Like, I was a solo artist for a little bit, and I spent a lot of time locally in the area, like working at music venues and stuff like that. And probably when I was younger, I thought I would be a rock star rather than a game developer. But, you know, I can be both. I'm not against working with other people. It's just when you're on a really limited budget and there's things that you can do yourself, then it makes sense to do those things. Like, I would never not write music for the game, but I definitely want to collaborate with more people, especially musicians, to kind of do something more with it. But the budget basically at the moment goes to art and dialogue heavily rather than anything else. So that's why. But yeah, I like collaborating with people. I think it's just because the game's so personal to me, and I love writing music and writing lyrics as well to express those things. It naturally fits into what we're doing.
Oh, absolutely. And you speak exactly like my co-host Adam, because he'll really enjoy this part about music, because he's all about the art and loves making his own music. Alyx, thank you so much, because obviously I think we're going to be around an hour mark towards the recording of this, but I really appreciate having you on. I can't wait to give you the final floor here. Here's the pitch. Sell it to the people if they're stuck around for this long, and they should be sticking around for this long, just to add to that. But I can't wait to give you the pitch, like, you know, where can they go to support the game, where they can follow you on socials, and just a reason to play the game as well.
Yeah, well, I guess Kickstarter is the main thing that we're doing, and it really, really does help us out a lot, even if you just back like a small amount. But you also get the game when it comes out, so it's good. You get a reward for it as well. I think, you know, if you care about those kind of games and you've played those kind of things that have had an impact on you and the way that you think about things, I think it is a power in society that we can put our stories forward and change how people think about things and relate to one another as humans. So if any of those things matter to you, then maybe you want to have a little cheeky look, go for it, you know. But otherwise, I use Twitter chronically, so I'm always on there. Yeah, thank you very much.
No worries, there's your cue as well. And yeah, if you do want to go and check out the project, check out on Kickstarter. The links will be in the description, they'll be in the comments as well, so go and check it out. There's different tiers that you can support, so if you want to be a voiceover in the game as well, I believe there's a tier for that, so you can support at different tiers. But as I said, we'll leave it here. Alyx, thank you so much for coming on. It was really great to have you here. And to everyone watching as well, thank you for watching. If you are new here as well, please do consider dropping a subscribe, turn notifications, like and share with your friends. Helps you keep up to date with the content, helps you support content, helps you find new games like this one as well. I'm pitching it as much as humanly possible, because you should definitely go support the quiet things on Kickstarter. But again, Alyx, thank you so much. Best of luck with the Kickstarter. I hope it goes through. I hope the game gets lifted off and takes you to where it needs to be, and I'll definitely be keeping my eye on it. But until then as well, stay tuned. We'll have more content coming to this channel. Until then, take care, guys.
Thank you so much for having me.